and or death, we will prevail.
When the Western leaders heard fatherland or death in the United Nations, they were literally shocked. That's because these are the words said by Che Guevara, the revolutionary leader of Cuba. Yet he didn't stop there.
70% of our territory is now under state control. That compares to 40% in 2022. That turning tide has allowed displaced persons to return. Schools have been able to reopen in less than 2 years. Our taking back of our territory has allowed more than 700,000 people to return to their villages. That action has allowed almost 1,500 schools to reopen their doors.
So, do African countries need Western help to fight against insurgents and criminals? Well, this was used as an excuse by Western powers to send their troops to African countries. However, Burkina Faso's foreign minister has just revealed that compared to having control of 40% of the state's territory back in 2022, Burkina Faso's government now has control of 70% of the territory. You should know that back in 2022, French troops were present in Burkina Faso, but it was useless. They were never there to eliminate insurgents. Rather, they were to ensure French neo-colonial control in Burkina Faso. By revealing this, and saying the forbidden things, Burkina Faso's foreign minister shocked the West live in the United Nations General Assembly. But what more did he say? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you what Burkina Faso's foreign minister said that has created shockwaves in Western presidential offices. Let's get started. In this passionate and unapologetic speech, Burkina Faso's foreign minister didn't come seeking sympathy. He stood as a powerful voice for an Africa that is no longer willing to be oppressed by Western exploitation and condescension. His message was clear. Africa will no longer be passive, controlled by Western powers that have long dictated the continent's future, pretending to be the architects of global progress while reaping the benefits of African resources. He pointed out the hypocrisy of the global system, one that positions the West as the moral authority, while their policies continue to destabilize African nations for their own gain. The minister's words were a call for Africa to reject the notion of being a second-class continent, one that's forced to wait for handouts and follow orders on how to govern. Burkina Faso's foreign minister made it clear that Africa doesn't need the West's charity or its hollow promises of equality and justice.
We must go beyond words and finally take action to usher in a fairer world rid of prejudice and stereotypes which seek to treat certain peoples or certain parts of the planet as second class. Treat them as people doomed to wait in the prisons of isolation and scorn, waiting for handouts, living at the mercy and whims of great powers that claim to be the only ones able to indicate the path that others must follow, and they dictate how others must live.
What it needs is for these outdated systems of prejudice and manipulation to be dismantled. These are the systems that treat African nations as mere pawns in a game of global dominance. The minister didn't hold back, bluntly revealing how this domination comes through economic suffocation, proxy wars, and the weaponization of insurgency. These so-called global powers who claim to stand for peace are the same ones fueling conflict in Africa to keep the continent weak and dependent. He exposed this harsh reality for what it is, a ploy to drain Africa of its wealth for Western profit, all under the guise of aid and stability. But Burkina Faso, and indeed the entire Sahel region, has seen enough of this neo-colonial insurgency. The minister made it clear that those days are over. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso has reclaimed its land, expelled foreign forces like the French, and restored its sovereignty. What Western interference has done is make African nations stronger, more resilient, and more determined to rid themselves of foreign control once and for all. The fact that Burkina Faso now controls 70% of its territory, up from just 40% when French forces were supposedly helping, is proof of Africa's unstoppable will for self-determination. He openly criticized the Western countries for manipulating African countries for foreign agendas. The minister boldly criticized the multilateral system, dominated by Western powers, as nothing more than a false front of fairness. This system was never built to uplift Africa, he said, but to keep it subjugated. And yet, African nations like Burkina Faso will rise, not with Western approval, but in defiance of Western sabotage. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. The minister spoke of a new Africa, an Africa that will no longer stand in the background, but will lead with the strength and determination of its own people. The future of Africa, he declared, will be built by Africans, not by Western nations that continue to see the continent as nothing more than a source of cheap labor and raw materials. The results speak for themselves. Schools are reopening, villages are being rebuilt, and displaced people are returning home. Burkina Faso's victory over the insurgency, funded and orchestrated by neo-colonial forces, is living proof that Africa doesn't need Western interference to thrive. What Africa needs is what it has always had: the power, resilience, and wisdom of its people. The minister declared that Africa's rise is inevitable, and those clinging to outdated ideas of African subjugation will soon find themselves irrelevant. The era of Western exploitation is nearing its end. Africa's sovereignty, self-determination, and bold vision for the future will create a new world order, one built not on colonial ambitions, but on the shared prosperity and solidarity of African nations. The Western leaders were hiding their faces during his speech, praying he would stop. Yet he was in no mood to stop. The minister commended the extraordinary efforts of Burkina Faso's defense and security forces, along with the support of the diaspora and the nation's citizens, who collectively raised an impressive $165 million in 2023. This achievement, he emphasized, did not come from foreign aid or handouts, but from the determination and strength of the Burkinabe people themselves, proof that Africa is fully capable of financing and fighting its own battles.
Made possible by the endeavors of our defense and security forces, by the patriotic commitment of our volunteers for the defense of the homeland, and by the staunch support of the diaspora and the outpouring of solidarity they've showed. This patriotic mobilization of all of our society has allowed us to collect some 99 billion CFA, that is $165 million, in 2023 alone. That far exceeded initial estimates. In other words, you can see here how determined our people are to finance and wage a struggle against terrorists and their allies.
He went on to condemn the ongoing smear campaigns against Burkina Faso's soldiers, which he said were orchestrated by Western powers trying to undermine their legitimate struggle for freedom. He said that these unfounded accusations of human rights violations were nothing more than attempts to derail the progress of African nations that are reclaiming their independence. The minister made it clear that the West has long underestimated the determination of Burkina Faso and other African countries to break free from the paternalistic control that has defined their relationships with global powers for far too long.
We're seeing that we are the victims of a defamation and smear campaign being waged against our soldiers. They are being accused of violating human rights without the slightest smidge of evidence being brought forward. This propaganda has been cobbled together and aims to lower the morale of Burkinabe patriots and to sabotage their legitimate struggles. And that's happening quite simply because the acolytes of chaos have not yet understood the dynamic underway. They haven't yet understood our desire to free ourselves of all paternalism and condescending guardianship.
The minister did not shy away from pointing fingers at another European country that is itself at war, but is supporting insurgency in the Sahel region. This startling revelation shed light on how Western-backed nations have meddled in Africa's internal affairs, fueling conflicts under the guise of promoting democracy, when their true motive has been to maintain control over Africa's vast resources. He then exposed the long-standing tactics of Western powers, which have included manipulating African leaders, waging proxy wars, and arming insurgent groups to destabilize the region. These strategies, the minister argued, are part of a broader effort to keep Africa divided, weak, and subservient, allowing the continued exploitation of the continent's resources. He said that the presence of Western military bases across Africa is no accident. It's a calculated move to maintain dominance and keep African nations as mere pawns in the global power struggle. In contrast, the minister celebrated the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, a military coalition formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger for collective defense and mutual assistance. This alliance symbolizes African unity and self-reliance, a direct response to the failure of Western-backed institutions to adequately address the security needs of the African people. The Sahel nations have chosen to take control of their own destiny, working together to combat insurgency and organized crime without depending on Western intervention. The Western leaders couldn't believe what they were hearing. Yet, Burkina Faso's message was unmistakable. Africa will no longer be subjugated by foreign powers that exploit its resources, interfere in its governments, and dictate its future. The minister's speech was a declaration for creating a new world order, one in which Africa is no longer treated as a second-class continent, but as a strong, independent force, charting its own course toward prosperity. This is the beginning of a new era, where Africa, empowered by its own people, will rise and reclaim its rightful place on the global stage. The West must adapt to this new reality, or they will find themselves left behind as African nations break free from the shackles of neocolonialism. The minister made it plain: Africa can no longer depend on the empty promises and ineffective actions of the West. While global powers remain complacent, the people of the Sahel have taken matters into their own hands. The AES represents African self-reliance, a coalition built not on the approval of Western nations, but on the shared determination of African countries to protect their land and people from terrorism and the chaos fueled by foreign interests. He was carrying Ibrahim Traore's unapologetic message about the UN being used as a tool by the West. He called out the hypocrisy of the UN that promotes peace while failing to act as conflicts rage across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. He urged the UN to move beyond empty rhetoric and finally take real, tangible actions that promote peace and justice on a global scale. Central to his speech was a call for true reform in the United Nations Security Council, demanding that Africa be given its rightful place at the table. The minister emphasized that the historical injustice that has kept Africa on the sidelines of global decision-making must end. He argued that only by giving Africa its due role in the UN can the organization truly represent the people of the world. What do you think? Do African countries need Western help to survive and thrive? Isn't it true that the West never wants Africa to be truly independent, but always relies on Western help and aid to hardly exist? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on whether Western countries sabotage Africa's efforts to grow and take control of their resources. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.